Mason had been dreaming of this day for years. After working long hours in the city and saving every penny he could, he finally owned a small cabin by the lake. It was not fancy, but to Mason, it was perfect. Tall pine trees surrounded the property, and the lake reflected the sunlight like a giant mirror. The air smelled fresh, and the quietness made him feel at peace. On the morning of the move, Mason parked his old pickup truck at the edge of the private road. Boxes and furniture were stacked neatly in the truck bed, and his small trailer carried his belongings that could not fit inside. He looked at the winding road leading up to his cabin and felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This road had been part of the neighborhood for decades, and today, it was taking him to the first day of a new life. As he drove slowly down the road, Mason noticed Mrs. Hartman standing at the corner near her house. She was middle-aged, dressed neatly, and had a look that could make anyone feel nervous. She waved her arms and shouted in a sharp voice, "This truck is too big for this road. You cannot park here. You are breaking the rules." Mason stopped and rolled down the window politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartman. I have permission from the property manager to move in today. I will make sure the truck does not block anything. I just want to get my things to my cabin safely." Mrs. Hartman shook her finger at him. "I don't care what the manager says. I will call the police if this truck stays here. You are disturbing the neighborhood." Mason took a deep breath. He had expected some resistance, but he had not imagined it would happen on the very first day. "I understand, ma'am. I will be very careful. I only need a few hours to unload, and then the truck will be gone." Mrs. Hartman glared at him for a moment and then marched back toward her house. Mason continued driving slowly, following the curve of the road, careful not to hit any potholes or brush against the trees. His cabin came into view. It was small but cozy, with a wooden porch and a stone chimney. The lake was visible beyond the clearing, sparkling in the morning sun. Mason felt a wave of happiness. As he began unloading boxes, he noticed a police car slowly approaching. Two officers stepped out and walked toward him. Mason greeted them calmly. "Hello, officers. I believe Mrs. Hartman called about the moving truck. I have permission from the property management, and I am just unloading my belongings today." The officers listened carefully as Mason explained everything. One officer nodded, writing notes on his pad, while the other looked at the truck and the road. "It seems you are following the rules. Just make sure the truck does not block traffic, and everything should be fine." Mason thanked them. Even though the presence of the police had made him nervous, he remained polite and cooperative. The officers left after a few minutes, leaving Mason to focus on his move. He spent the next few hours carefully carrying boxes into the cabin. He arranged furniture, stacked kitchen supplies, and placed his favorite books on the shelves. Every item felt like a small victory, proof that he had worked hard to reach this day. By noon, the truck was empty. Mason leaned against the porch railing, taking a moment to enjoy the view. The lake water glistened under the sun, and birds flew over the trees, singing their morning songs. For the first time in years, Mason felt a deep sense of peace. He had earned this moment, and nothing could take it away. But as he sipped a bottle of water and admired the scenery, he noticed Mrs. Hartman again. She was standing at her gate, arms crossed, watching him with a stern expression. Mason sighed quietly. He knew this was only the beginning. She did not approve of him being there, and she would likely continue to cause trouble. Mason reminded himself to stay patient. He had a plan. He had saved money, read the rules, and knew how to protect his property legally. Today was just the first day, and he would not let anyone ruin it. The sun started to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the road. Mason carried the last box inside the cabin and set it down gently. He opened the windows to let the fresh air in and stepped outside onto the porch. The lake reflected the orange and pink colors of the sunset, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Mason sat down on the wooden railing, feeling the rough texture under his hands. He knew that tomorrow would bring challenges, but he also knew he was ready. This lake cabin was his dream, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. The quietness, the beauty, and the feeling of freedom made every worry fade away. As the evening breeze swept through the trees, Mason smiled. He had made it. He was finally home. The next morning, Mason woke to the sound of birds singing and the gentle ripple of the lake against the shore. He felt refreshed and ready to continue arranging his new home. The first day had been tiring but exciting. He had carried boxes, arranged furniture, and even set up a small table on the porch where he could enjoy breakfast while looking at the lake. Just as Mason was about to unload more supplies from the small trailer, he noticed headlights coming down the winding road. His heart sank slightly as he recognized the familiar black and white of a police car. The vehicle slowed and stopped near the entrance to his property. Two officers stepped out and approached him calmly. Mason greeted them politely. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you?" One officer nodded. "We received a complaint about a moving truck blocking the road. We wanted to make sure everything is okay." Mason explained carefully, keeping his tone calm. "Yes, officers. I have permission from the property management to move in today. I am unloading my belongings now, and I have ensured that the truck does not block the road. I also have all necessary permits if you need to see them." The officers looked at the truck, the trailer, and the road. "It looks fine from here," said one officer. "We just wanted to make sure there were no issues." "We appreciate you being careful." Mason nodded politely, thankful for their understanding. "Of course, officers. I am happy to follow all rules." The officers left after a few minutes, but Mason felt a small twinge of unease. He knew Mrs. Hartman had been watching the entire time from her gate, and it was clear she had called them. Mason took a deep breath. He had expected resistance, but dealing with her so early had made him realize this move would be more challenging than he had imagined. After the officers left, Mason focused on unloading the rest of his trailer. He carried boxes of kitchen supplies, bedding, and tools into the cabin. Every trip back and forth gave him more confidence. He arranged things carefully, imagining the life he would have here. The lake reflected the bright morning sunlight, and the air was fresh and cool. Mason felt a quiet happiness he had never felt in the busy city. By late morning, the trailer was empty, and Mason decided to take a short break on the porch. He looked at the winding private road leading up to his cabin. It was narrow in places and bordered by thick trees. He realized that this road would be important not just for his move, but for everyday life here. Maintaining it and ensuring access was safe would be a priority. Just as he sipped a bottle of water, Mason noticed Mrs. Hartman once again. She was pacing near her gate, talking on the phone and pointing toward the road. Mason guessed she was calling someone to complain again. He felt a small frustration, but he reminded himself to stay calm. Getting angry would only make things worse. Mason had a plan. He began documenting everything carefully. He took photos of the truck parked properly, the road condition, and even the surrounding area. He made notes about the times Mrs. Hartman appeared and any interactions they had. This way, if she continued to cause trouble, Mason would have proof that he was following the rules. After lunch, Mason decided to take a walk along the road leading to the cabin. He wanted to see the area from a neighbor's perspective and understand any potential problems. The road twisted through the trees and past several other cabins. Mason waved at a few neighbors, and most waved back politely. Some seemed curious but supportive, noticing that he was working hard and trying to be respectful. As Mason returned to his cabin, he started thinking about the challenges ahead. Mrs. Hartman had made it clear she did not want him there, but he was determined to stay. He would follow the rules carefully, improve his property, and show that he could live peacefully without causing trouble. His dream of a lake life was too important to give up. By evening, Mason had finished arranging the cabin. He lit a small fire in the stone fireplace and settled into a comfortable chair. Outside, the lake reflected the orange and pink hues of the sunset. The gentle wind moved the tree branches, creating soft sounds that made Mason feel calm. As he watched the lake, Mason realized something important. This was not just about moving in, it was about standing firm and protecting his space. Mrs. Hartman might continue to complain, but Mason had patience, knowledge, and determination. He would face each challenge with a clear mind and careful planning. That night, Mason slept well for the first time in years. He was no longer in a crowded city apartment. He was in his cabin, by the lake, in a place he could finally call home. The road might have been narrow, and the first encounters with Mrs. Hartman had been stressful, but Mason knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. He felt ready for whatever came next. The morning sun rose over the lake, casting a golden glow across Mason's cabin. He woke early, feeling motivated to continue settling into his new home. The first days had been exciting but tiring, and Mason knew that living here would require more than just moving in. It would take patience, effort, and careful planning. As he stepped outside to stretch, Mason noticed Mrs. Hartman again. She was standing near her fence, her arms crossed, and her expression sharp. She seemed to be inspecting the road. Mason sighed quietly. It was clear she had not accepted his presence and would likely continue trying to interfere. Mason reminded himself to stay calm. He had a plan. He would follow the rules, document everything, and protect his property legally. Losing patience would only give her an advantage. After breakfast, Mason grabbed his camera and notebook. He started walking along the road near his cabin, taking photos of the pavement, the trees, and the surroundings. He documented where the truck had parked the previous day, the positions of any obstacles, and areas that might need improvement. Every detail could be important if Mrs. Hartman made more complaints. While walking, Mason met Mr. Thompson, an older neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. "Good morning, Mason," he said with a warm smile. "I saw what happened yesterday with Mrs. Hartman. Don't worry too much. She has always been like that with new neighbors. If you follow the rules, she can complain all she wants, but she won't have any real power." Mason nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I just want to live peacefully here. I don't want conflict, but I also don't want to give up my rights." Mr. Thompson chuckled. "That's the right attitude. I can give you some advice about the HOA rules and how to protect your property. It might help you handle her complaints in the future." After their conversation, Mason returned to his cabin with renewed determination. He spent the afternoon organizing his tools and supplies. He wanted to make improvements to his property and the road leading to it. If the road was well maintained, it would be safer for everyone and harder for Mrs. Hartman to complain. Mason also began researching HOA rules and property rights online. He carefully read every document he could find. He discovered that while the HOA had some authority, there were gaps in the rules that protected homeowners like him. He made notes and created a small folder to keep all the important information together. Later in the day, Mason began small improvements to the road. He cleared fallen branches, leveled some rough spots, and reinforced the edges with stones. He worked steadily, knowing that these improvements were not just for convenience, they were also a way to protect his property and prevent unnecessary conflict. As evening approached, Mason sat on the porch and looked at the lake. The water shimmered with the colors of sunset, and the soft wind moved the trees gently. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel proud. He had faced his first real challenge here without losing control or patience. But Mason also knew that Mrs. Hartman's complaints were not over. During the day, he had seen her pacing near her gate, talking on the phone and gesturing toward his cabin. It was clear she had already started planning her next complaint. Mason reminded himself that he could not control her behavior, only his own. He decided that every step he took would be careful, legal, and thoughtful. He would improve his property, document everything, and remain calm no matter what happened. By nightfall, Mason had set up a small system to track every incident. He had a notebook for dates and times, a folder for photos, and a list of any interactions with Mrs. Hartman. It felt like a small victory to be organized and prepared. He knew that knowledge and preparation were more powerful than anger or frustration. As he lit a small lamp and looked around his cabin, Mason felt a sense of accomplishment. The first days had been difficult, but he had learned something important. Patience, planning, and calm determination were stronger than any complaint or threat. The moon rose over the lake, reflecting on the water's surface. Mason stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the fresh night air. He looked at the road, the cabin, and the surrounding trees. This was his home, and he would protect it wisely and patiently. He also understood that this was only the beginning of a longer journey. Mrs. Hartman's constant scrutiny might continue, but Mason felt ready. He had allies, knowledge, and a clear plan. The battle for peace in his new home had begun, and he was determined to face it carefully, without letting anger guide his decisions. That night, Mason went to bed feeling confident. The challenges ahead were real, but he knew that with patience, preparation, and calm determination, he could protect his home and enjoy the life he had worked so hard to create. Mason woke early to another quiet morning by the lake. The water sparkled under the first rays of the sun, and birds sang softly in the tall pine trees. He felt calm, but he also knew that living here peacefully would require more than just hard work. Mrs. Hartman's complaints had already caused stress, and Mason realized he might need help to handle her persistence. After breakfast, Mason decided to walk along the road again, checking the improvements he had made. The edges of the road were reinforced with stones, and small branches that had fallen during the night were cleared. He felt satisfied with his work. The road looked neat, safe, and ready for visitors. As he continued walking, Mason met another neighbor, a woman named Linda. She was planting flowers near her cabin and smiled warmly at him. "Good morning, Mason," she said. "I saw all the work you've been doing on the road. It looks very nice." "Thank you, Linda," Mason replied. "I'm trying to make the road safe and clear for everyone. I just want to settle in peacefully, but it has been a little difficult with Mrs. Hartman." Linda nodded knowingly. "Oh, I understand. Mrs. Hartman has been like that for years. She complains about everything. But don't worry, many of us like you being here. You are careful and polite, and that makes a difference." Mason felt a wave of relief. He realized that some neighbors quietly supported him. "Thank you, Linda. That means a lot. I want to follow the rules, but I also want to protect my home." Linda smiled. "If you ever need advice, Mr. Thompson is very knowledgeable about HOA rules. He helped me when I moved in. I can introduce you if you like." Mason's spirits lifted. "I would appreciate that very much." Later in the day, Linda introduced Mason to Mr. Thompson. He was an older man with a calm presence, and he greeted Mason with a firm handshake. "I've seen what happened with Mrs. Hartman," Mr. Thompson said. "She has a strong personality, but you don't have to worry. If you know the rules and document everything, you can protect yourself legally." Mason listened carefully as Mr. Thompson explained the HOA regulations and property rights. He learned about ways to handle complaints, how to maintain records, and even small legal steps that could prevent harassment. Mason took notes eagerly. Every piece of information felt like a shield against future problems. "I have been in this neighborhood for over 30 years, Mr. Thompson continued. "Mrs. Hartman complains about new neighbors, but she can't stop someone who knows their rights and follows the rules. Patience and careful planning are your best tools. Mason nodded. Thank you. I want to live here peacefully, but I also want to make sure my property is protected. After the meeting, Mason returned to his cabin with renewed energy. He decided to make more improvements to the road and surrounding area. He cleared extra debris, leveled rough spots, and even added small wooden markers along the edges to prevent erosion. Every effort made the area safer and more appealing. While working, Mason noticed Mrs. Hartman watching from her yard again. He paused for a moment but did not react. Instead, he focused on the work, knowing that staying calm was more effective than arguing. By late afternoon, Mason sat on his porch and looked at the lake. He felt proud of the progress he had made. The road was safer, his cabin was organized, and he had allies who supported him. The small steps he took each day were building a foundation for long-term peace and security. He also started thinking about bigger plans. If he could find a way to have more control over the road or surrounding areas, he could prevent future problems entirely. The thought of taking careful, legal action gave him confidence. Mason knew that patience, preparation, and fairness would guide his decisions. As the sun began to set, casting orange and pink reflections across the lake, Mason smiled. He realized that the challenges with Mrs. Hartman were not just obstacles, they were opportunities to learn, grow, and create a better home. By staying calm and gathering allies, he was turning a difficult situation into a manageable one. That evening, Mason wrote in his notebook. He recorded the day's events, improvements to the road, and conversations with neighbors. Every detail mattered. He felt that careful planning and documentation would not only protect his home but also build trust with other neighbors. Finally, Mason stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. The lake was calm, and the forest around him seemed to whisper encouragement. He felt ready for the challenges ahead. With knowledge, allies, and careful planning, Mason knew he could turn even Mrs. Hartman's complaints into an opportunity for patience and control. That night, Mason slept well. The road was safe, his cabin was ready, and he had a plan. Life by the lake was beginning to feel like a reality he could enjoy, and Mason knew that he was prepared for whatever came next. The morning sun reflected brightly on the lake as Mason stepped out onto his porch. The air was crisp, and the quiet of the neighborhood gave him a sense of calm. He had spent weeks settling into his cabin, improving the road, and learning the rules of the HOA. But Mason knew that small improvements alone would not fully protect his home from Mrs. Hartman's persistent complaints. He needed a bigger, more strategic plan. Over breakfast, Mason reviewed his notes. He had documented every interaction with Mrs. Hartman, every improvement to the road, and every conversation with supportive neighbors. As he flipped through the pages, an idea began to form. The road leading to his cabin and the nearby properties, including Mrs. Hartman's, was technically shared, but there was a small portion of the land that could legally be purchased. If Mason acquired that portion, he could gain more control over the access to the road. It was a careful move, fully within the law, and it could prevent future problems. After some research and calculations, Mason called the property owner of the small section of the road. He explained his interest in purchasing it and his plan to maintain it properly. The owner was pleased to sell, knowing Mason would care for the property. Within days, Mason completed the purchase and became the legal owner of the small section of road that led directly past Mrs. Hartman's house. When Mrs. Hartman learned of this, she was shocked. Mason heard about it from a neighbor who had seen her reaction. She had assumed that owning a cabin gave no extra control over the road. Now, Mason held a legal position of authority. But Mason remained calm. He had no intention of being unfair or harsh. His goal was safety, order, and protection, not conflict. Over the next week, Mason focused on improving the newly acquired section of the road. He leveled the surface, filled potholes, and added small safety markers. He also installed proper drainage to prevent erosion during rain. Every improvement increased the safety and usability of the road, benefiting both himself and the neighbors. Mason's efforts were practical, fair, and visible. Mrs. Hartman continued to watch, clearly annoyed, but Mason did not respond to her gestures or complaints. He knew that remaining polite and fair would strengthen his position. Any attempt by her to create problems now could be addressed with legal documentation, which Mason had prepared meticulously. One afternoon, Mason walked along the road, inspecting his improvements. Mr. Thompson joined him, carrying a small toolbox. "You've done a good job, Mason," he said. "The road is now safer than it has been in years. Anyone who uses it will appreciate your work, even Mrs. Hartman eventually." Mason smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson. I just want this neighborhood to be peaceful. I am not trying to create conflict. I just want to make sure my home is protected." "That's the smart way," Mr. Thompson replied. "By staying calm and following the rules, you are showing that fairness and patience work better than anger or confrontation. Owning this portion of the road gives you more control, but you can use it wisely to maintain peace." Mason nodded. He realized that ownership was not about power in a mean sense, it was about responsibility. By caring for the road and setting clear rules for its use, he could prevent problems before they happened. He made a note to send letters to neighbors, politely explaining the improvements and the rules for safety and maintenance. Transparency would avoid misunderstandings and reinforce trust. Over the following days, Mason continued small improvements. He cleared debris regularly, added reflective markers for night safety, and even planted flowers along the edges of the road to make it more attractive. The work took time, but Mason found it satisfying. Every step he took strengthened his position while keeping the neighborhood friendly and fair. Mrs. Hartman watched silently from her yard. Mason noticed her gaze but did not react. He focused on finishing his work efficiently and correctly. Over time, her complaints slowed, as it became clear that Mason's actions were reasonable, documented, and fair. She could no longer create disruption without risking legal consequences or looking unreasonable to the other neighbors. By evening, Mason sat on the porch, watching the lake glow under the setting sun. The road was smooth, safe, and orderly. He felt a sense of quiet victory. He had turned a challenge into an opportunity. By being patient, careful, and strategic, Mason had gained control of a difficult situation without creating conflict. He reflected on the journey so far. Mrs. Hartman's complaints had tested his patience, but they had also taught him valuable lessons about planning, fairness, and strategy. Owning the road was not about revenge, it was about protecting his home and creating a peaceful environment. Mason realized that life by the lake was not just about enjoying the view, but also about taking responsibility and thinking ahead. That night, Mason wrote in his notebook, noting the improvements and his plans for ongoing maintenance. He felt confident that the road would remain safe for everyone, including Mrs. Hartman. For the first time, he truly felt in control of his new life, knowing he could face future challenges with calm, fairness, and wisdom. The morning sun reflected gently on the lake, and Mason felt a sense of calm as he stepped onto his porch. The work on the road was complete, and the improvements had made a noticeable difference. The surface was smooth, the edges were reinforced, and the small markers and flowers made it both safe and attractive. Mason had achieved more than he had hoped, but he knew that true success would come from creating lasting peace. Over the next few days, Mason noticed a subtle change in the neighborhood. Other neighbors began walking along the road, smiling and greeting him politely. Some stopped to compliment the improvements. Even Mrs. Hartman, who had been critical from the start, was quieter. She watched from her gate but no longer waved or shouted. Mason understood that his calm and fair approach had earned a quiet respect, even from his most persistent critic. One afternoon, Mason decided to host a small gathering on the lake shore. He invited neighbors who had shown support, including Mr. Thompson and Linda. They brought snacks, drinks, and stories to share. Mason set up chairs along the shoreline, where the sun reflected off the gentle ripples of water. The mood was relaxed, cheerful, and friendly. As neighbors shared their stories, Mason realized how valuable community could be. The lake cabin was not just his personal space, it was also a place where people could come together peacefully. He noticed Mrs. Hartman watching from a distance, but she did not approach or interrupt. Mason felt satisfied that the improvements and his careful approach had created a positive environment. During the gathering, Mason shared some of his experiences with moving in and managing challenges with neighbors. He spoke about the importance of patience, preparation, and fairness. The neighbors listened attentively, appreciating his calm demeanor. Some even shared tips on maintaining the road and landscaping, which Mason eagerly noted. After the gathering ended, Mason spent the evening walking along the road he had worked on so carefully. The smooth surface reflected the soft glow of the sunset, and the markers and flowers lined the edges beautifully. Mason felt proud, not because he had gained legal control over the road, but because he had used it responsibly. His actions had strengthened safety, order, and community trust. Over time, Mrs. Hartman's complaints decreased significantly. She no longer called authorities or sent letters about minor issues. Mason understood that his fairness and careful documentation had left no room for unreasonable complaints. He had turned a challenging situation into a manageable one, gaining both control and peace. Mason also continued to improve his cabin and the surrounding property. He planted a small garden, arranged seating near the lake, and added a few lanterns along the path for evening light. Every improvement was thoughtful and deliberate, enhancing both his enjoyment and the appeal of the neighborhood. Neighbors began to visit more often, appreciating the effort Mason had put into creating a safe and welcoming environment. Children played near the shore under the watchful eyes of their parents, and families walked along the road without concern. Mason realized that what had begun as a personal dream had grown into a positive influence for the entire community. One evening, as Mason sat on his porch, he noticed Mrs. Hartman watering flowers near her gate. She caught his eye and gave a small nod. Mason returned the nod politely. For the first time, there was no tension, no anger, only a quiet acknowledgement. He understood that victory did not always mean confrontation or revenge. Sometimes, it meant patience, strategy, and responsibility. Mason reflected on the journey. The first day had been stressful, with complaints and police visits. Then came weeks of careful improvements, research, and documentation. He had gained control over the road legally and used that control wisely. By remaining fair and respectful, Mason had created a lasting solution to what could have been a continuous conflict. As the moon rose over the lake, reflecting silver light across the water, Mason felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His cabin was a home, the road was safe and well maintained, and the neighborhood had grown more peaceful. The challenges he faced had strengthened his confidence and taught him the value of calm and thoughtful action. Mason went to bed that night feeling content. He knew that life by the lake was no longer just a dream, it was a reality shaped by careful effort and patience. Mrs. Hartman's presence no longer caused worry or stress. Instead, Mason focused on the quiet beauty of the lake, the soft rustle of trees, and the gentle rhythm of life he had worked so hard to create. Peace had been achieved, not through confrontation or force, but through calm persistence, fairness, and responsibility. Mason understood that this victory was lasting because it was built on trust, respect, and careful planning. The lake cabin was no longer just a place to live, it had become a symbol of patience, perseverance, and quiet strength. The morning sun rose slowly over the lake, turning the water into a sheet of gold and orange. Mason stretched on the porch of his cabin, feeling the calm of the early day. It had been months since he had first moved in, and life by the lake had settled into a peaceful rhythm. The road was smooth, the cabin organized, and the small garden beside his home bloomed with flowers. Mason smiled as he took a deep breath of the fresh, pine-scented air. Over the past months, Mason had learned many lessons. The challenges with Mrs. Hartman had tested his patience, but they had also strengthened his determination. Through careful planning, fair actions, and patience, he had managed to create a safe and welcoming environment for himself and his neighbors. Now, the road he owned was well maintained, and neighbors respected the improvements he had made. The cabin was no longer just a place to live, it was a symbol of his efforts and dedication. That morning, Mason decided to take a walk along the lake's edge. The water was calm, reflecting the sky and the trees around it. Birds flew overhead, and a gentle breeze brushed against his face. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life he had created. This place was quiet, safe, and beautiful. He thought back to the day he had moved in, remembering the stress of complaints and police visits. Now, everything felt peaceful and balanced. As Mason walked, he noticed a few neighbors along the road. Linda was tending to her garden, smiling warmly as she waved. Mr. Thompson was repairing a small fence near his cabin. Mason waved back, feeling the comfort of familiar faces. The neighborhood had grown friendlier, and Mason realized that his calm, fair approach had not only protected his property but had also improved the sense of community around him. By late morning, Mason returned to his cabin and decided to spend some time improving the cabin itself. He organized his shelves, cleaned the fireplace, and arranged seating on the porch. Each small task reminded him of the effort he had put into creating a peaceful home. He reflected on how challenges could be opportunities when approached with patience and thoughtful action. In the afternoon, Mason invited a few neighbors for a small picnic by the lake. Children ran along the shoreline, laughing and playing, while adults shared stories and enjoyed the scenery. Mason felt a sense of pride and happiness. His cabin was now more than just a home, it was a gathering place where friends and neighbors could enjoy the lake safely. Mrs. Hartman appeared briefly during the gathering, standing at her gate and watching silently. Mason noticed her but did not feel the need to act or respond. Over time, she had reduced her complaints, understanding that Mason followed the rules and acted fairly. Today, her presence did not cause tension. Mason realized that his patience and responsibility had turned a potential conflict into a quiet understanding. As the sun began to set, Mason sat on the porch with a cup of tea, gazing at the lake. The water shimmered under the orange and pink sky, and the trees cast long shadows over the cabin. Mason reflected on his journey, the excitement of moving in, the challenges with Mrs. Hartman, the improvements to the road, and the support of neighbors. Every step had taught him the value of calmness, preparation, and fairness. Mason thought about the first day he had moved in. The complaints, the police visit, and the frustration seemed distant now. What had started as a stressful experience had become a journey of growth and achievement. Mason smiled, realizing that he had not only secured his home but had also created a peaceful life in the process. Night fell, and the lake glowed under the moonlight. Mason lit a small lantern on the porch, casting a warm light over the cabin. The gentle sounds of water lapping the shore and the rustling of leaves in the breeze made him feel content. He understood that true happiness was built on effort, fairness, and patience. By remaining calm and thoughtful, he had turned challenges into victories. Before going to bed, Mason walked to the edge of the lake one last time. He looked at the reflection of the stars on the water and felt a sense of harmony with his surroundings. His cabin, the road, and the lake were all part of a life he had built carefully and responsibly. Mason realized that life by the lake was more than just peaceful, it was a reward for his perseverance, strategy, and patience. Finally, Mason returned to his cabin, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had created a home, a safe road, and a positive environment for the neighborhood. The challenges he faced had been real, but his calm, fair approach had ensured lasting peace. Mason went to bed, knowing that the life he had worked for was now his, filled with quiet joy, respect, and the beauty of the lake. As Mason drifted to sleep, he thought of the journey ahead. Life by the lake would continue to bring simple joys and quiet moments, and he was ready to embrace them fully. He understood that patience, responsibility, and fairness were the keys to a happy life. Mason smiled, feeling at peace. This lake cabin was not just a home, it was a dream realized through wisdom and care, and it would continue to be a place of joy for many years to come.